Hi, and welcome to today's Location Intelligence Best Practices webinar brought to you by Yellowfin. To give you some context for today, this is a fairly broad topic. It can be highly technical for some in terms of the content, and we'll do our best really to explain a lot of the concepts and components of that today. To put it in perspective, when talking about location intelligence, we're really talking from our perspective as a BI vendor, we're talking about how you integrate location and spatial data into your business intelligence environment. There is a very broad spectrum of solutions in the geospatial space, and today is not really the place for that. It is really in essence thinking about how we integrate spatial information into business intelligence and use that. So that's just to give a little bit of context about the day. Location intelligence, it's really where it's all at, and so for today, your presenters will be myself, Yellowfin CEO and founder Glenn Raby, and I'm joined by Daniel Shaw-Dennis, our Strategic Alliances Manager. And we'll be talking a little bit about the experiences that we've had around location intelligence, some of the things that we've seen, and share with you some of the best practices we've seen in that space in terms of integrating with a business intelligence environment. So, what is location intelligence? Simply put, it's the capacity to include spatial data into business intelligence. So it's taking your location data, such as your stores, such as where your customers are, and integrating them and visualizing them in a spatial way in conjunction with your business intelligence information. In talking about today, and we'll be covering a lot of terms that I've got to admit when we started working in the space were very much new to me, and that comes as no surprise. This statistic here, only 11% of IT managers are familiar with the term location intelligence. So today we're assuming that we're dealing with the other 89%. We're assuming that most people come to today with little understanding of what's possible and how it's delivered, and so we'll be talking to that specifically. It all starts with our data. So the really core of location intelligence and mapping and spatial data sits with the fact that 80% of data has a location element. And so when we started with Yellowfin, we started to try and display and visualize spatial information. This was the reason that we approached that and why we think it's so important. And what this means is that really, if you think about your data, if you think about your business, and the things that are important to your business, when you start to pull them apart, you realize how much of it is location-based. So if we think about where your customers are versus where your stores are, if you think about where your suppliers are in consideration of your supply chain, if you think about where you're marketing and how you're marketing and which demographic is effective for you in your particular business, then all of these things really are tying back into some spatial definition. So, from a simple address all the way through to point data and being very specific about the geolocation. And all of us today really carry around devices that can pinpoint us geospatially. We all have smartphones and etc. that with their GPS components on them can be very specific in about where we are. And so that is really the starting point, is thinking about and being aware of your data in terms of its spatial dimension. And in terms of this, it really does include your customer address, your store address, supply location, events. So, for example, if you're an insurance company, you may want to know which specific events occurred, natural disasters, etc., and build those around your risk frameworks. You may look at particular areas that have a high propensity for theft versus others, and that gets built into your risk model. Government regions, so from a perspective of funding and working through government processes, the region's electorate boundaries are very, very important. And then lastly, another example is sales territories. So knowing the most effective breakdown of your sales territories, where do you place them, how big are they, what's the potential of that particular sales territory given the customer base there and the demographic of that customer base, and whether or not you need smaller ones or not, or bigger ones. So really there is just a huge gamut of spatial information that is important to most people's business. What do people use this data to determine? Well, Good examples are, how big is my market area? So if I look at my current customer base, I can see, what the catchment area is, I can determine what my potential market is. What's my share of market? So, a good example, if I'm in the vehicle manufacturing, I might want to know exactly what my share of market is. So what percentage of sales in a particular geographic region belongs to me in my particular demographic. This could be in the retail space as well, of course. And so really understanding, therefore, which markets offer the greatest potential for growth. So if I know what my market share is, I own 80% of Melbourne, but I only own 20% of Sydney, then clearly Sydney has a great potential of growth for me. As a result of that, I consider my spending potential for my product in this market. So I can start to make some marketing decisions about how I'm going to actually address that potential, address that market. And lastly, if I'm a bricks and mortar establishment, how many stores can this market support? So what's the potential of that market in terms of the total volume, and therefore the number of stores and where those stores are located to make the most potential of that. So if we take all of that and we think now about a traditional business intelligence tool and why location intelligence and mapping is so important within BI, we really need to think about where's the value. The first is that traditional tables and grids and graphs really fall short. And what I mean by that is if I am to look at a table that contains every postcode in Australia or every state in the US, and I want to analyze my data against that, it's very difficult for me to process that. So the cognitive ability of a person to process a table is actually far, far less than if we looked at that on a visual perspective. And the best visualization for any kind of spatial data, of course, is going to be a map. And so this is where maps really do help people to understand their data far, far more than just putting it into a table. The second, and kind of related to this, is one of the great things about spatial data, and when it's visualized on a map, is that you can see where data is not located. And so again, if I'm looking at a table that consists of 1,000 postcodes, it's very, very difficult for me to find the ones where I'm actually not doing very well, or I might not have had any sales. So traditional BI tool would actually bring back no data. You wouldn't even see a row, and so you'd have to actually work out which ones are missing. Within a map, though, you get to see the pieces that are missing. So it's very simple to see where things aren't, and that really provides you that big opportunity. And the third is really to be able to overlay animation onto maps. So is to use time as a core component of your spatial data, and to see changes over time, and again to see that visually. And that's really where, if we take all of these three combined, is why mapping has such a huge appeal within a BI environment, where people get so much value out of it and very quickly. And today we want to really touch on some of these aspects and show you about the approaches that you can use. So a few case studies, how it is used, and I kind of like to start way back to give some context to this. So location intelligence is not new. The use of maps to understand particular phenomenon is not new. And this example is often used in terms of historical perspective, is a cholera map of 1854. What this map shows and how it was used was essentially to pinpoint the incidence of cholera compared to where water supply was for a particular region within a town, and as well as particular sewage outlets. And as a result of this, in plotting all of these elements together, what was discovered was a correlation between, obviously, the incidence of cholera and particular outlets of water and their location with regard to sewage. So the benefit of this, and this is really what comes to the heart of one of the really valuable aspects of mapping, is that you can overlay multiple disparate points of data, in interests of data, and we as humans ultimately have the capacity to merge that and to make some associations, to see patterns within that information. Patterns that are so much easier to see on a map as opposed to seeing a table, etc. And so how does this get used today? So a couple of recent examples from Yellowfin. Two examples I want to talk about is one is in the retail sector, Mecca Cosmetica, who use Yellowfin, and they use it to, one, to track their customers. So where do their customers reside? This is based upon loyalty information. So when a customer enters a store, does a purchase, they know essentially where that customer lives. And they know which store they've shopped in. So for Mecca, it's really interesting to understand the dynamic between the buyer, so where does the shopper reside, and the shops that they actually shop at. And if we think about this in context, they have a number of stores and quite a growing retail chain. So seeing the difference in buyer behaviors in terms of times of day, day of week, for particular stores, say in particular the city, where a lot of people obviously come in to work, and so that they may in fact live many kilometres away from potentially another closer store to them, but they'll shop in the city because of the convenience of that, versus on the weekend where they might go a hub such as the Chadstone. And so this information is being used by Mecca to determine, on the one hand, where best placed, where it's most effective them to place new stores, to work in more catchment for their particular customer segmentation and understanding of that segmentation and the demographic of their customer. So that's really a retail example about trying to work out stores. From the Macquarie University perspective, so Macquarie's been doing quite a bit of work in spatial data. And they use a whole variety of things. The one thing about Macquarie did win an award last year for Best Location Intelligence Solution, and that was built using Yellowfin. How they use it, and they use it in a variety of ways. They look at it from a campus map perspective to look at flows of students and the density of students across particular courses throughout the day, etc. So they use it at that level, but they also use it at a marketing level. So one of the core pieces of Macquarie's business is to attract students from overseas, full fees paying students. And the way to do that is, one, is to understand where they currently attract their students from. So having a really good understanding about the particular areas and the demographics of those areas that they are attracting students from. So, what's the average income? What's the demographic in terms of education, where they're getting the largest results from? And then looking at that and saying, well, here's a particular segmentation that we have, so they'll be able to define the prospective student very well. And then to find similar regions throughout the world that would match that demographic, and then to target marketing to those demographics. And this is most effectively done using location intelligence, to be able to see this on a map globally, understand where it is happening, and from their perspective, where the most appropriate spend for marketing is moving forward to attract a similar and wider and broader audience for their services. So those are two quite disparate businesses, but who are using spatial information in ways to really improve their own business outcomes. So having a broad view of that, let's look at some of the styles that you can use to put your data on the map. And there are a number of them here, and I want to touch on some of the language that's used, so as we move through today, you get a sense of how this works. And it might make a little bit more sense when we get into the detail. So the very first style, and really simple style of visualization, spatial visualization, is the use of raster maps. And so in this example here, we're assuming that you don't have very detailed geographic information. You may have things, so if you've got an address, an example, you might have state information, you might have country information. And so broadly, you want to be able to see your data spatially at quite a high level. And the raster map is good for that. Excuse me. You simply take any image and you take that, so it starts with an image, and you can take that and turn that into a thematic map. So the thematic in terms of color coding based upon the values that are brought back from the Yellowfin database. And it doesn't just have to be a map as we see it here. It doesn't have to be a world map. It could be a floor plan. It could be a map of the human body. It could be anything. And this is where really the flexibility of the raster map comes in. Very simple to implement, very quick to use, and very flexible, because you can build a whole range of elements in there. The second type of geospatial rendering that we do is polygons. So we have the capacity here to take a shape, and this is what a polygon is essentially a shape, and render that shape. And so in this example here, we're able to take a whole lot of shapes. So we've got in our database, we've got a shape for Texas, a shape for New Mexico, a shape for California, and what Yellowfin does is brings all these shapes together and renders them on a map. What we do behind that then, in this case here, we've placed those shapes or polygons on top of a Google map, but we can also connect in, use what's called the WMS layer. This is a web map service, so we can call products, specific geospatial products like Esri and MapInfo, and we can use that to render detailed maps behind our polygons and behind our points. And so, the combination of the two, you get a lot of context. You get to see very specifically the shape of the state, the sales territory, the government area, and we render those. And then we can, again, color code them thematically based upon the value of the thing that we're measuring. So if we're measuring average income or per head of population, et cetera, the density of color will change so that we can see these thematic changes that occur with our data on a spatial, in a spatial way. A little bit more detail is point data. So points are essentially really specific points in space. And this is using latitude and longitude data. And what this allows us to do is to, again, either take it from a database fundamentally and be able to plot that. And so using point data, this is when you really need detailed information around your spatial information. So if you want to know a person's exact address as opposed to where they generally are. So if they're generally in an area, you can use suburbs, so a zip code or a postcode would be close enough. But if you really want to know precisely where people are, you get the point. So you get the geolocation of their property or of the building, etc. And so points are another thing that Yellowfin renders. So we can make calls to a database that supports geospatial reporting, such as Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, and we take that geospatial data and we render it. One of the things that Yellowfin does do separately is that if you don't have a database, or you have a database that does not support geospatial rendering or geospatial data, then you can save this data as text into a text field, and Yellowfin will render it for you. So we have the ability to convert it into geometry and then render it as part of our visualization technique. Taking points a little bit further, we can create heat maps. So we can take now the density, and so the size of the bubble and the color of the bubble can be based upon the values that are being displayed. And this is a very good way of showing density within your data set. And so in this case, a heat map, we could look at levels of risk. So if we're looking at, from an insurance perspective, number of claims made across a region, and so by seeing high density, we can start to see hotspots. We can see areas that are more likely to be have a higher incident of theft. And so you might change your fees accordingly. You could be looking at property value. So again, you might want to see where the hottest turnover of property is in the market versus areas where there's little to no turnover. And so again, that's what the heat map's used for. And this example here, we've used a WMS layer. So this is coming again to that web map service. We've called to give context to this heat that we've created by querying a database. We need to put something behind it so we know where it is. And we've used a map that we've called from a mapping tool to do that. So it's not on top of a Google map, it's on top of this other map that we've brought back. And again, just to give you a sense of the kind of flexibility you have and some of the choices you have when doing location intelligence. And lastly, time animations. So how do you take point data, in this case, and play it over time? So I want to see, over 3 years, I want to see the growth in my markets. I want to see my sales from year 1 all the way to the 3rd year. And this is really good to understand potentially ebb and flow of product across different demographics. So if you've got a product that tends to be picked up by early adopters and you want to see it move over time, then seeing time animations and seeing where people do exist and how product flows is a very interesting way to visualize your data. The interesting thing about time and location is that they are distinct in the sense that compared to all other dimensions that people use, these are two common dimensions that are used pretty much by all organizations. And so they can be built upon. You can build location hierarchies, you can build time hierarchies that are consistent and used multiple times across multiple applications in your business and across businesses. And they are unique in that sense. So the knowledge that you get and the expertise you get around this is easily transferable from one scenario to another. And I think that's what makes this whole piece, quite exciting. So that's it from me in terms of a very high-level piece. Dan's now going to take us through the best practices and the approach that you can use, and give you some sort of details about how that's done. At the end of that, we'll come back and we'll answer a whole lot of questions, etc. So, Dan, if you just want to take control and go from there.
Thank you for that, Glenn. All right, thanks everyone. So let me just launch into PowerPoint. Okay, so essentially, as Glenn mentioned, what I'm going to launch into is some of the best practice techniques that we've learnt that we want to talk about today, and I guess show you practical examples of them in action. So straight off the bat, the first one is geocode your data. So actually mapify it, as we like to say here. And essentially what this is really adding that geospatial, geographical information to your data. So that might be something like a state or a country that might have a polygon that you might want to represent. Or if you've got a customer address, a zip code, a postcode, you might want to put point information that lat long that Glenn mentioned. But what's really important at this level is getting it right for your audience and I guess the information that you're trying to portray. And I'll show you, I guess, an example of what I mean in the practical sense. So let me just flip into Yellowfin. Now, for those who haven't seen Yellowfin, this is it, obviously our BI tool. So what I've just launched into here, I've just logged on and I'm looking at a Yellowfin dashboard, which is made up of a number of reports. So I'm just going to open up one of these reports and create a geospatial report for you. So I'm going to click onto here. Okay, so I'm into the Yellowfin reporting tool. So I'm just going to enter into the data section. So once again, for those who haven't seen it, the way that our reporting tool is made up of, you've got your objects or dimensions in or measures in your data set that are on the left-hand side here. And essentially, you kind of drag and drop these into the middle part, and you can define your reporting output on the right-hand side here. So at the moment, I've just grabbed invoiced amount, and I put a little filter on year. So I'm going to bring one of my geospatial pieces of data in, such as a polygon. So I'm going to go to step 2. I've grabbed a year worth of information and jump into the report like so. So I've asked for a chart because we want to see this visually. So I'm just going to enter into Yellowfin's charting tool. So essentially, I guess how we create reports in Yellowfin or charts, we have a number of different visualizations, but for the ones we're after here today is around the mapping space. And these are the different types that we have: Google Maps, thematic maps, bubble charts, etc., which I'll actually go through as part of the demonstration portion. But I've chosen a thematic map like so. Essentially, you get a drop down. So I'm going to pick up my geospatial field, which is the polygon. I want to see my invoiced amount. I want to label it and see what that number is when I look at my report. So I click on refresh, and I can start, see my geospatial map take place. I can see my invoiced amount. Now, given that I know what countries look like, I can see this is North America, Russia and Australia. But to give this a bit more context and depth, I want to actually add a layer here of I guess, the world and see this on a map. So with that, in Yellowfin, I can just choose a layer like so, and layer that onto my report, and then quite easily I can actually see where everything's happening in relation to the world. I can see obviously there's a lot more sales happening in Canada. Hover onto Japan based on the thematic item there, and I can change my scale just over here if I wanted a different color scheme or whatever I need. So this really works, I guess, country level. I'm looking at a high level figure. But say I am a country manager, I want to see, well, essentially how those sales are broken up in a particular area. So for that, I might want to use point information. So if I go back to the editor of the report, and I'll just flick in like so, I'll pull out my polygon and add my point. Go to next step, goes back into my chart creation tool. I'll click on that and I will select the geo point and click refresh. So from here, now straight away I can actually see a different pattern. So, across North America, it's, a lot of around the East Coast where a lot of my sales are. And in Japan, it's really dominated by a couple of, big sale marks. So, depending on the audience and depending on what you really need to show, it's important to, get your geospatial data mapped at the right level. So where do you get this information? So there's a number of different ways. If you don't mind spending a bit of money, there are providers or third-party organisations that can provide geospatial data in the formats that you need, polygons, points, etc. If you're a little bit more thrifty, you'll find that a lot of the government websites, I know Australia, US, provide a lot of that information around, postcodes, zip codes, states, in lat longs, in polygons, etc., all kind of free and available to use. Or if you've got a bit of time on your hands, you can always jump into Google and get that information manually. Or, if you find you're missing out on a half a dozen points in your data set, you can always jump on and fill in the blanks yourself. So there are different ways in which you can get that information. So best practice 2, using multiple layers for better insight. And we had a bit of a preview of that as part of the last examples, and showing having the world map sitting behind there, I actually see where my information sits. But essentially, by having the ability to provide multiple pieces of information, in a geospatial type reporting scenario, as well as able to see these different metrics in the one spot, you can actually find the correlations and find the patterns that make sense to you. So I'm looking at sales information. Where is that in relation to where my stores are? Where is that in relation to where my customers are? And actually, getting those patterns and matching it up to make a better decision about your business. So best practice 3, background maps. Really providing context to your spatial data, points or polygons. And Glenn showed a bit of an example earlier. Items like Google Maps, web map services layers. We can actually see terrain. You can see cities. So I can see, for example, where are my capital cities? Where is the high density of population? From where I should be targeting things. From looking at coastline, if I'm a surf shop, where should I be positioning myself? If I'm a fishing organisation, where are the lakes and rivers? Where should I be selling to? So adding that context, with these other layers to really provide a richer data experience there. So let's go into show you a couple of examples of best practice 2 and 3. So I'm going to jump into a GIS dashboard that I've created earlier. So the first dashboard, or first report on the dashboard we have here shows my geospatial report, similar to what I had earlier. And I can see down the bottom here in Yellowfin, you can actually choose multiple metrics to see on this map. So I'm looking at my average age of camp. I might want to see invoiced amount, so we all care what we get paid. Now I can see that information and also layer additional items in place. So here are my sales. Okay, well, where are my athletes or my customers in relation to those sales? Pick the layer like so, and I can see that information, and depth is there. I can see I've got high sales in Oz, but it's really around the Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane region that's providing a lot of that to me. So having the extra depth and be able to see the correlation with different pieces of data. If I scroll down a little bit further, I can see using a third-party mapping tool like a Google Maps in here, and I can use obviously Google's fantastic tool to zoom in and see information, see the texture that I want. I can look at the breakout of states here in the US. And likewise, using a WMS layer, an Esri or a map info, any third-party layer, I can see other pieces of depth here, like the mountain terrains, in North America, and items that relate to the information that I want to present. Okay, so fourth, best practice. Think beyond traditional maps and geography. So I guess the automatic thought when we're thinking about locational intelligence is to think, maps, think places, but it really is about, location that makes the most sense for your business. So this is not just the traditional map. And what we're talking about is here, campus maps looking at student numbers. If I'm a health organization, I'm looking at the human body, which areas are more prone to disease, prone to injury, and using, locations such as that, warehouse floor plan, looking at stock levels. The way we do this in Yellowfin is being able to upload an image and actually assign your data to that image. So you might not have geospatial data in the more traditional sense, but to your organization you can upload an image and map your data to that image. So you can actually, make it make sense for what you're trying to do. And I'll show you an example of that here in Yellowfin. So I'm just going to open up my Bones report. And what this report is doing, so we've imported an image, which is the hand here. And essentially with this report, I can hover over it. It's a thematic map, so I can see this particular bone group has got the most number of fractures. And it kind of, as I hover over, I can see, look, what are my fracture levels on my hand. Up the point of it, it's not too bad. Down a bit further, it gets a little bit more serious. And essentially, what we're doing here is we've uploaded an image and assigned a color code to pieces of that image. So let me show you, how that's all done. So if I jump into Yellowfin, as I said, you have the ability to import images and maps and use that. So I'm going to jump into the Bones image. And here it is here. So we've uploaded an image, as you can see here, and you've got different color codes across for those 5 kind of areas. And each of those color codes are mapped to data in my data set. So, each code has a residing color. So when that information comes through from the data perspective, it's automatically mapped to those areas in that image. So if I take a step back and jump back into that report, and if I look at the underlying data that sits there, so I'm going to jump back into the report editing tool. Now this is currently a chart, and I'm going to add a table and chart so you can see what's behind there. I've described the bone group and the number of fractures. And if I go to step 2, I can see this is my data. Hover over it, it relates to what my image is, and it's assigned those bone groups to the values, the colors in the image. And that's essentially how it works from a Yellowfin perspective. So best practice number 5, combine mapping with other visualizations for a deeper understanding. So I guess what we're talking about here is, using your location information with your other elements in your data set. So, using a dashboard as well as seeing your map, I can see, looking at sales, what are the campaigns that I've run there? How does that affect the number of customers that I have? So using a dashboard to see a large set of data, and being able to use filtering and slicing and dicing to break down the information. So I've got my geospatial report combined with some information. Let me filter on certain demographics that I want to target. Let me filter on certain age groups that I want to use for a marketing campaign. And using those elements in conjunction with geospatial data makes a really, really powerful analysis tool. So best practice number 6, let your location data drive you to the information that you need. So Glenn touched on this before. Essentially, if you're looking at this information in a large tabular format, it's going to take you a lot longer and a lot harder to locate the key information that you need. So if I'm looking at a geospatial map of the world, like we had earlier, I can very quickly and easily see what are my highest performing areas, and I can drill down and drill through to that information to see the underlying more traditional tabular data about that particular area, as opposed to kind of taking a long way to get to it. So using the geospatial data to highlight key information, whether it be a positive or a negative, so you can then action that and see what's sitting behind there. So let's see, before I go into number 7, a little bit too soon, some of that in action. So if I flick onto my analysis tab, so once again, those who haven't seen Yellowfin before, the dashboard that I'm loading up here is what we call an analytical dashboard. So essentially, we've got a series of reports on our dashboard here, but all this information is linked together, which makes for a very, very powerful analytical tool. So I've got my geospatial report here. I could pick a particular region on my filters on the right-hand side. I can click go. And what that essentially is doing is filtering all the information on my dashboard. I can see obviously my region has changed here. But I guess one of the powerful features, I can drill down on one element on my dashboard, and it drills down my whole data set, including my geospatial information. And from here, I've pinpointed where I want from a North American perspective. I can actually kind of drill into this and see that deeper level information that I want to get to. In this example, it's looking at campaigns that sit behind there. So using those filters and slicing and dicing and drilling down to essentially what you need to see. And this can also be done at, I guess, a kind of high level mapping element to drill down to lower levels in the structure. So if I kind of scroll down here we've got the Google map that we saw before. Now I'm looking, I can see like in California there's a really high hit rate. I can actually drill down on my map as well and see all those individual counties, and I can see straight away by the shading that Los Angeles is the strongest one of area around LA is the strongest performer. So looking at every single county on a tabular format of America might be a very long process to get to the information that's I want to see down here. So let me just jump back into best practice number 7. Look for opportunities where no data exists. So what we're talking about here is seeing what's not there is sometimes as important, if not more important, than seeing what's there. So I'm looking where are my sales occurring on a heat map. Where can I put new stores to generate sales? Where are customers not? Where should I be targeting from a sales and marketing campaign? And using geospatial visualizations, you can see that very, very easily. Combining that with filters to say, look, where are my target demographics in which areas, and going forward from there. So really, seeing where things aren't, which people sometimes don't really think about, but it can be very, very important. So let's see that in action once again. So here's our kind of layered report that we had earlier, showing me my sales information and showing me, I guess, where my athletes are. Now, if I actually kind of drill down into Europe a bit, I can actually see, well, there's actually no one in France. France is a pretty big region. This is somewhere I should be targeting. Do I have a sales force in place? Are they being effective in what they're doing? Because they've got no sales so far, if that's true. So seeing what isn't there and being able to then action that kind of going forward. And if I scroll down a bit further, I can see that kind of evident in my heat map here. So if I just zoom out, as I've been kind of zooming in with this, essentially being able to see where my sales aren't. So around the Utah, Colorado, Nevada area, there isn't a lot of action happening there. Once again, and these are areas that I can action opportunities there that I should be doing something about, or on the vice versa. So using these visualizations, I can then drill down to it, see who are my salespeople in those areas, etc., and combining that with your information to get to the answers that you need. So that really concludes the show and tell portion of our best practices webinar. As Glenn mentioned, there is a question box that's sitting as part of your kind of go-to webinar panel. So I'm just going to open that up now, and I think we're going to go through some of the questions there. So the first one, how do we, obviously I think we hopefully have answered that, how do we get different geopoints information? I understand that some of the stuff is out of the box, and how I get certain maps in certain counties and deploy them. So essentially, hopefully, we've covered part of that question. I think that was an early one, anyhow. But essentially, from a data perspective, loading that into your system from one of the many sources that we spoke of, and then Yellowfin can bring that information in and render it for you. And also, linking in, I think the second question there around, Google Maps as well. So if we put Google Maps background, do we need to pay for Google Maps license? Yes, generally I'd say that's something that you do pay for depending on the organisation that you are. I know that they do things for education and different areas. So it really depends on who you are and I guess what relationship that you would have with Google.
Just to touch on that again, Dan, so yes, Google Maps is obviously one of the types, the background types, but because we do support WMS and another number of ranges, I suppose, of ways in which you can render that, there are alternatives, there are open source alternatives to in terms of geospatial applications that you could use and to get a similar, if not as rich a perspective. So, yeah, the one thing obviously Yellowfin doesn't do is ship with enterprise Google licenses for everyone, but depending on your usage and how you use it, it may or may not be free. Something worth checking.
Mm-hmm.
The next question, what configuration is required to enable mapping? Is it out of the box? I'm used to OBI, 10G, where amount of configuration is required. It is out of the box. So what you saw today, the capacity to render is fundamentally, and to build layers and all that is really what Yellowfin does. Having geospatial data, on the other hand, is the piece that you need to think about, is about how do you get that data into a database. So with, I'm not really from memory with Oracle, again, licensing around geospatial elements. I'm not sure what the licensing is. I think it could be an additional license for a database. Having said that, SQL Server geospatial comes out of the box with that. MySQL, Postgres, geospatial data types come out of the box. And again, if you don't have geospatial database, we can still store it as text and render that as well for you. And again, that's out of the box. So there are quite a few options there in terms of progressing forward with that. The next question, how do we handle very small countries, for example, countries in Europe? Dan?
Yeah, so essentially we would handle it and fine, depending on, I guess, how you wanted to show the information. So essentially, if you had, smaller countries in Europe from a data perspective, Yellowfin is smart enough to know what you're looking at and will only show that information. So, for example, if you're looking at, a couple of the Eastern European countries as part of your reporting, when you run a report, if that's the only data that is coming through, that will be shown in your report itself. So, won't worry about everything else in the world, essentially. So, but once you open that up, it'll show more. So, so that's from a data perspective. But I guess visually, in terms of what kind of data that you have, there is different ways you can show that from a polygon or a point, which makes the most sense for the information that you're trying to represent. Okay.
The next question is, with Google deprecating version 2 of their API, how does this affect the use of Google Maps in Yellowfin? The good news is Yellowfin already uses version 3 of their API, so I think we're pretty good to go on that one. So that should be fine. Does it work on flat tables, or does it need full lap schema? So this is again about how your data is stored. From a Yellowfin perspective, generally speaking, geospatial data types are stored in relational databases, so we can do that. Depending again on the level you want. So I don't believe that OLAP supports querying. So for example, show me everyone within 5 kilometers of a particular store. That type of query I don't believe is supported in OLAP. It is supported in relational tables. So again, you need to think about what you need to do and how you're doing it. So given the varieties of ways in which we can render. Do we have a rough idea of the average price for geocoding? So taking a draft that long. I'm sorry, we don't. There are services you can use. I think Google has a service that is free again to a certain, depending on how many calls you make on it per day. So there are a number of services available. And so I think at the moment we're sort of close to the end of our questions. If there's any more questions, certainly happy to answer them now. We have come, it was a 40-minute webinar, so we have come to the end of our 40 minutes. You know, and if you do have more specific questions or you want to know a little bit more about Yellowfin and how we do things, then please feel free to ask. I mean, this is, again, was very much a high level best practices, as opposed to a you know, like a complete how-to within Yellowfin. So just to give you a sense and a taste of what's possible. How do we organise trial software? Straight off the website. There is so there is an evaluation request on the Yellowfin website, yellowfinbi.com. You can use that. If you want to know more about geospatial, etc., and how to do drill downs, there is a geospatial tutorial that's on our tutorial list. You can that's available there as well as within the wiki, within etc. So, you know, once again, thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciated your time and attendance. And as mentioned, if you've got further questions and can help you beyond this, then we're certainly very keen to talk to you further. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.